Mike and Lisa had a great life. Mike was a senior engineer at a well-known tech company. Mike had built up a successful career at a well-known tech company. Thanks to his expertise, he had a great reputation and a good salary, which allowed him and his wife Lisa to enjoy a comfortable lifestyle. Lisa worked with clients as a marketing manager at a busy downtown firm. She was known for her charm and skill and quickly became a favorite among her clients. The couple shared a warm, loving bond rooted in years of mutual respect and companionship. They recently renovated their home together. The house was renovated with Mike's practical approach and Lisa's eye for design. It's the pride of their suburban neighborhood, with cozy living spaces and a big open kitchen, perfect for family dinners. It feels like a sanctuary. They designed every corner with their future in mind, creating a home they could imagine growing old in together. Sarah and Jacob, their two kids, are the heart of their family life. Sarah is the oldest and is a curious, bright 12-year-old. Sarah was 12 and Jacob was 7. Sarah had her mother's wit and her father's calm nature, while Jacob adored his older sister and clung to his father's side whenever Mike worked on little projects around the house. Weekends were full of laughter, the sounds of games and home. The four of them cooked meals together every week, and they also had a Friday night tradition of watching movies together on the couch, munching on popcorn. Lisa made the popcorn just right. Mike and Lisa also had big plans. They dreamed of traveling once the kids were a bit older, and they even talked about opening a small business. They envisioned a future filled with shared adventures, and perhaps one day grandkids filling the very halls they just remodeled. But recently, a subtle shift had crept into their lives. It began with Lisa mentioned a particularly important client, David, who she often worked late on projects for. She said how much the account meant to her career. Mike trusted Lisa, but he couldn't shake a feeling that something was a bit off. David's name seemed to pop up more often than any other client. When Lisa's phone lit up late in the evening with a text from him, Mike's sense of unease grew. So David extended an invitation to Mike today. She said, "He's organizing a little weekend getaway at this amazing resort on the coast. It seems he's rented out the whole place just for us and a few other teams." Mike raised his eyebrows, showing he was interested. "He said I could bring you along, and he invited all of us to bring our partners." Lisa's eyes sparkled with excitement. "He thinks it's important for everyone to unwind and spend some time together outside of work. It's a big deal." Mike felt a faint chill at her enthusiasm. He could already picture this David, a client so important that he could rent out a resort. He made it sound like it was just a casual affair, which was pretty generous of him. He said his voice was steady as he tried to suppress the pang of unease stirring in him. "He really is something else." Lisa continued, her smile lingering as people looked up to him. "He's got this whole presence. You know, it's inspiring, and it's a fantastic opportunity for me to network and connect with the team outside of the office." Mike nodded, but a pit was forming in his stomach. This David was clearly more than a regular client. He was a man with enough influence to whisk everyone away to a high-end resort. He was high enough status that he practically demanded admiration from Lisa, and he didn't even know him. Mike tried to ignore his discomfort, forcing himself to smile. "That sounds like a pretty big event. I bet it'll be good for you and your team." He heard his own voice and thought it was calm inside, but he felt an odd sting of jealousy. He didn't like the idea of David playing host to his wife as one of his honored guests. Lisa, who was clearly excited, leaned into her enthusiasm. "I knew you'd get it. Just imagine a beautiful ocean resort, all expenses covered. I'll finally get to introduce you to everyone, and if things go well, David might even look into expanding our account. This is huge for us." Mike kept his face composed even as his mind wandered to the resort weekend and what it might hold. He couldn't deny Lisa's enthusiasm, but he could already feel the weekend looming over him. It was going to be a weekend where he'd have to face up to his worries about David. The resort was beyond anything he'd imagined. As he and Lisa pulled up the winding drive, the Grand Hotel loomed into view. It was bathed in the soft glow of evening lights. It was perched elegantly on a cliff overlooking the crashing waves of the ocean. It was the kind of beauty you'd expect from a magazine cover or movie scene. Magazine covers and movie scenes. The facade was lined with towering palms, and the soft murmur of a nearby waterfall drifted through the air, adding to the resort's enchanting atmosphere. Stepping into the lobby, they were greeted by marble floors gleaming beneath chandeliers that hung like crystal rain. Warm golden light bounced off the polished surfaces and the scent of sea salt mixed with fragrant flowers. Mike had seen his fair share of nice hotels on business trips, but this place was in a class of its own. David was already in the center of the lobby, mingling with the arriving guests. He was tall and striking, exuding confidence in a way that made it clear he was used to being in control. His designer suit was as flawless as the rest of him, and he had a broad, welcoming smile. When Lisa saw him, she lit up. She was really happy that you both could make it. David called them over with a confident ease, his voice carrying across the room. He seemed to own the place, which Mike soon discovered he did. David extended a hand to Mike, who shook it firmly, trying to hide his surprise as David casually mentioned he'd bought the entire property a few months back. I laughed as if buying a luxury resort was no big deal. I figured if I was going to host events here regularly, I might as well make it my own. David, this place is amazing, Lisa said, clearly impressed. She looked around, her eyes wide as they took in the high ceilings, the sculptures, and the grand piano in the corner of the lobby. I've never seen anything like it. I'm glad you like it. I thought it would be the perfect setting for everyone to relax and connect. Make yourself at home. They settled into the evening, mingling with David's team and other invited guests. David's presence seemed to hover, magnetic as he made his rounds, effortlessly charming everyone he spoke to. He had a way of making people laugh, leaning in just close enough to show interest but not be too close. Lisa seemed fascinated. She looked at him more than once, and every time he approached their little circle, she leaned in and listened to him attentively. Mike told himself not to mind, but each glance and each laugh Lisa shared with David made him feel uneasy. Later that night, Mike was in for another surprise. He was back in their suite, which was larger than most apartments, and had Lisa seemed happier than he'd seen her in weeks. She poured them each a glass of champagne from the complimentary bottle waiting for them. She raised her glass with a warm smile to us, saying, "Thank you for coming with me. Mike, I know this isn't exactly what you had in mind for a getaway." She was so affectionate tonight. Her hand was on his shoulder and she was laughing. She kissed him, and it was the sweetest thing he'd felt in a long time, but it also made him uneasy. It was as if she was trying to reassure him, or maybe herself. He wondered if she was hiding something, but then he looked at her, and she was radiant and content. His worry felt small, even unworthy of the... He wrapped his arms around her, pulled her close, and told himself to let the worries wait until morning. Tonight, here in this beautiful place, he would let them have this and let himself trust. The morning began peacefully enough. Mike and Lisa shared breakfast on the resort patio overlooking a sunlit ocean that sparkled under a cloudless sky. The early hours had been almost idyllic, and Mike felt his as they chatted over coffee and fruit. The previous night's anxieties slipped away. Then David approached their table. His smile was as polished as ever, but there was something in his eyes that made Mike's curiosity mingle with caution. David invited them to his office for a private talk. They followed David through the hotel's elegant halls to a secluded office. Once inside, David motioned for them to take seats across from him at the broad mahogany desk between them. He leaned back in his leather chair, seemingly lost in thought, eyes narrowing as he weighed his words carefully. "There's something I've been considering," David finally said, his gaze shifting between them. "It's unconventional, but I believe, with the right mindset, it could be advantageous for all of us." He paused, letting his words sink in. His eyes lingered on Lisa in a way that made Mike shift uncomfortably in his chair. David leaned forward, folding his hands with a serious demeanor. "I'll be frank, I'd like to spend tea night with Lisa alone. I'm willing to compensate you both handsomely," he said. Mike's heart froze. His mind was struggling to catch up. It felt like the floor had dropped away beneath him. His whole world suddenly spun out of control. For a moment he thought he must have misunderstood. "Excuse me," Mike stammered. His voice was rough. "What are you saying?" David didn't flinch. "It's exactly as I said," he replied calmly. "A financial offer. It's a matter of mutual benefit. Really, Lisa would stand to gain. You would think of it as an investment in your family's future." Mike's mind was a blur. Each word hit him hard. It was like a slap in the face. His disbelief gave way to fury. He couldn't imagine how anyone could think he would allow something so appalling, let alone that David had the nerve to say it to his face. His hand clenched tightly around the arm of his chair, feeling a hot surge of anger he could barely control. Then, as he was about to let his rage fly, he noticed a large man standing by the door, a security guard who shifted subtly, a silent warning in his eyes. Mike swallowed his anger, still boiling but now tempered by the weight of reality. "Are you out of your mind?" he said, his voice trembling with indignation. "I should." David raised a hand, calm and unfazed. "Let's not act impulsively, Mike." His offer made her feel uneasy. She looked at David, her brow furrowed as if weighing up the pros and cons. "Lisa," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "this isn't you. Don't actually think this is something to consider." Lisa's face softened, but only briefly. She touched his arm, a hesitant smile on her face. "Mike, just hear him out," she murmured, almost soothingly. "This could change things for us. Think of what it could mean. David is influential, and this could mean serious opportunities for me, for both of us." Mike's whole body tensed. His hand was trembling. As he looked between them, struggling to make sense of the betrayal that was taking place right in front of him for years, he had built a life with Lisa on love, trust, and integrity, and here she was, trying to justify something that felt fundamentally wrong. "You're really considering this?" he asked, his voice barely steady after everything for money. Lisa's face grew tight and she looked away, as though embarrassed, but she didn't say no. David took advantage of the silence, his tone steady and almost comforting as he spoke. "This is only, Mike, there's nothing here that can't be controlled. For Lisa, this is just another way to secure her future, and our futures." The rationality in his voice and the businesslike tone felt absurd, almost surreal. Mike's indignation swelled his fists as he fought against the urge to lunge across the desk. His eyes darted to the security guard who watched him like a hawk, making it clear there would be no sudden moves. "Listen," David continued, as if speaking to A. "Mike, I get why you're reacting this way, but this isn't as big of a deal as you think. It's just a night, and no one has to know except us. But there's nothing left to discuss." Mike pushed back his chair, his hands braced on the edge of the desk. "You're sick," he hissed, fighting to keep his voice from cracking. "I don't care what you offer, it's a no," he said as if they were discussing terms on a contract. "I'll give you both until tonight." Mike didn't wait another second. He turned on his heel and left. His heart was pounding, his stomach was churning with disgust. The worst part was that Lisa hadn't outright refused. "Please, subscribe to the channel." Mike stormed out of David's office. His heart was pounding, and his mind was racing as he tried to process what had just happened. The morning sun was warm, but he felt cold to his core. He felt chilled by the casual business. David had made his disgusting offer, and the thought of Lisa even considering it made Mike's stomach churn. He hurried down the resort's manicured path, his vision blurred by anger and disbelief. How could she? He reached the edge of the terrace overlooking the ocean, trying to catch his breath as waves crashed against the shore below. His jaw clenched so hard his teeth hurt. His hands gripped the railing as he fought to steady himself. A few minutes later, he heard footsteps behind him. Lisa's voice was soft and careful as she approached him. "Mike, can we talk?" He turned to face her. In that moment, the depth of his pain must have shown in his eyes because she stopped short. Mike gave a wry smile, his expression betraying his inner turmoil. He shook his head, struggling to hold back the frustration and hurt that were boiling over inside him. "This is insane," he said, his voice rough and raw. "Why would you even consider something so sick?" "We have enough," he continued. "We have everything we need, 2 kids, a great home, a good life. What's making you want to throw it all away?" Lisa sighed, looking away. She walked away towards the ocean, her hands clapping together as though she were trying to come up with the right words. Then she looked back at him, her expression pleading. "Mike, look, this won't change anything between us. It's just one night. Think about what we could do with the money. We could pay off everything, secure the kids' futures, maybe even buy that vacation home we've always dreamed of." Her voice grew excited, her eyes almost shining as she laid out the vision in her head. "David's offering us a chance to have a life we could never imagine." Mike stared at her, barely recognizing the woman in front of him. She spoke as if entranced, her words echoing David's promises as if she were repeating lines fed to her. "Lisa, you're talking about selling yourself," he said, his voice cracking under the weight of his hurt. "You're actually considering betraying us and our family for some money. I can't believe this. I don't believe this." She shook her head and stepped closer. It's not a betrayal, she insisted. We're strong enough to handle this. I love you, Mike, this isn't. You can change your mind, it's just a one-off. Then it's over and we move forward. No one else has to know. It'll be like it never happened. Mike could feel his heart breaking with every word. He wanted to reach out to her and pull her back from whatever strange spell had clouded her mind. But she was looking at him with a mixture of pity and frustration. It was as if he were the one who didn't understand, and that hurt the most. Lisa, don't you see how this does change everything? This isn't the woman I know, the woman I married. She wouldn't consider this for a second. Don't be so rigid. For the people they love, I'm trying to think about our future and our kids' futures. He was shocked by what he was hearing. Sacrifice, he said. You're willing to sacrifice us for one night with him. You'd rather have his money than keep our family together. How could you, Lisa? She hesitated, her expression changing as she saw the depth of his pain. But then, as though something pulled her back, her face hardened again. This is an opportunity, Mike. You don't understand how rare it is. The doors it could open. He couldn't listen anymore. Every word felt like a knife, twisting deeper. Her enthusiasm for David's offer made it clear she was no longer the woman he trusted, no longer his partner. It was as if David's promises had bewitched her, filling her head with dreams of wealth, success, and luxury. It was all a poison, Mike felt, seeping into their marriage and destroying everything they'd built together. Lisa, I can't do this, he said, barely keeping his voice from breaking. This is unbearable. I feel like I'm losing you to him, and you don't even see it. He took a shuddering breath. Mike was overwhelmed by the despair he felt. I can't be part of this, Lisa. I won't. She looked at him, a mixture of hurt and irritation on her face. You're being selfish, she said, her voice cold and clipped. You're letting pride get in the way of our future. Why can't you just see this as a means to an end? A choice like this is one you can't take back. Maybe you've already made that choice. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing there by the rail. The distance between them felt insurmountable, like a chasm he could no longer cross. The entire day passed in a strained silence. Mike and Lisa exchanged a few words, each wrapped tightly in their own thoughts. Mike's face, he was set on what he wanted, and kept his gaze steady when he looked at her. He'd made it clear that morning that if she went to David, there'd be consequences. He wasn't sure what they'd be yet, but he knew he couldn't stand by while she threw away everything they had. Lisa met his intensity with a calm demeanor. Nodding, he pretended to understand, but he felt like her words were empty. Mike had spent the day with a growing dread, unable to shake the feeling that she was only humoring him. As evening fell, the hotel came alive with chatter and music, the social atmosphere in full swing as guests mingled and laughed. Despite the lively scene, Mike's unease deepened. Lisa he was on his own, smiling and chatting with other guests, but he could tell she was watching him. Finally, she slipped away into the crowd, moving with a casual grace that made him feel uneasy. He knew what she was up to. She wasn't coming back to their room tonight. He felt angry and helpless. He could picture her now, heading to David's suite. He was in a state of shock. He felt trapped and caged by the power David held, and by the security that made it impossible for him to act on his instinct, to storm in and pull her out of there. He could only imagine the look on David's face if he even tried. Then, as he paced the empty hallway near their room, an idea crept into his mind. It was a reckless and dangerous idea. He couldn't stop Lisa outright, but perhaps he could still make a statement. He could make something bold and something that it was a crazy idea, but it was the only way to turn this night upside down and shatter David's smug plans. In seconds, the flames grew faster, the dry fabric igniting with alarming speed. Smoke began to curl upward, thickening in dark plumes that twisted up to the ceiling. The fire spread along the curtain, licking toward the walls and reaching for the nearby furniture. It was only when the heat intensified and the smoke started to billow down the hallway that Mike felt the shock of what he'd done. I watched in horror as the flames roared to life, crackling viciously as they devoured the drapes and spread to the wooden trim along the walls. Panic gripped me as I realized the fire was quickly spiraling out of control. I hadn't intended for it to go this far. The smoke was already thick, a dark cloud filling the air, and I felt the heat searing against my skin as I backed away. My satisfaction was now buried under the weight of my actions. Alarms began to blare through the hotel. Mike heard a loud, piercing sound that made guests rush from their rooms. He could hear their alarmed voices echoing in the hallways. Mike's heart pounded as he realized the seriousness of his actions. He hadn't just caused a distraction, he'd caused a crisis. He stumbled back, coughing from the smoke. He watched people flood the hall, some shouting, others covering their faces against the acrid air. Staff rushed forward, and within moments he saw hotel security and firefighters scrambling to get the situation under control. Mike was overwhelmed as he made his way through the crowd, trying to put as much distance between himself and the blaze he'd started. He felt a grim satisfaction, knowing his protest had disrupted everything. But he was also filled with dread, realizing that the fire was more dangerous than he'd intended. He kept moving, trying to blend into the chaotic crowd. He hoped against hope that the fire, born of desperation, would force Lisa to see the flame she was playing with before it was too late. He thought about the meeting between Lisa and David. Just as things were getting interesting, a loud siren suddenly blared through the air. Leah, who was already midway through her conversation with David, froze. Her heart skipped a beat. David stiffened, looking towards the door with a mix of confusion and irritation. "What is that?" Lisa asked. Her voice was tight. It took them both a moment to process the noise, and then a sudden announcement crackled over the hotel's intercom, urging all guests to evacuate immediately. David cursed under his breath and hastily straightened his shirt. "Let's go. This place is supposed to be equipped for anything." It was probably just a false alarm, but the blaring sirens and the growing commotion from the hall outside told a different story. Thick clouds of smoke began to curl in from under the door, their dark, ominous shapes billowing into the room. Elle's stomach dropped. She hurriedly buttoned her shirt and stepped back from David, a chill rushing through her as they filed out of the suite, joining the frantic flow of guests. A nagging thought struck her. She felt a pang of guilt as if Mike was somehow involved. The tension, his visible pain, his warning, could he have done this? She realized how far her actions had pushed him. A flash of his face, strained and angry, played through her mind. As they descended the stairs, her heart hammered, and her mind buzzed with worry and regret. The smoke was thick in the lobby. Lisa and David moved towards the exit, joining the guests who were coughing and rushing out to safety. Just as they reached the wide double doors, Lisa saw Mike. He had a hard, unreadable look on his face as he pushed his way through the crowd towards them. Their eyes met, and Lisa felt her guilt deepen as she realized the extent of the pain her actions had caused. She opened her mouth, unsure of what she would say. Then, Mike moved towards David with a quick. Mike swung his elbow up in a smooth arc, catching David square on the nose. David stumbled back, his face filled with shock, before he collapsed to the ground, dazed and out cold in the chaos and smoke. In the last seconds before passing out, he realized what had happened. But guests were too focused on getting out, coughing as they shielded their faces and hurried toward the doors. Mike turned to Lisa, his eyes dark with a mixture of anger and hurt. As he grabbed her arm and pulled her outside, she stumbled after him, dazed and unable to form a coherent thought, still reeling from the whirlwind of events outside. The cold night air hit her like a stark contrast to the smoky, heated confusion inside. The shriek of sirens continued as firefighters arrived, hosing down the source of the flames. Thankfully, the fire hadn't spread far. Most of the damage was from the smoke, but the commotion was enough to send guests murmuring in disappointment and alarm. As she watched the scene unfold, she tried to process the rush of emotions. She glanced at Mike, but his face was stone cold. His gaze was fixed on the ground. It was only then that she fully understood the weight of what she had done. Guests trickled out, tired and shaken. She saw that some of David's team members were casting weary glances back at the hotel. Their faces were clouded with frustration. Their perfect evening had turned to ash and smoke. As Lisa watched, she finally realized the implications of her decision. She hadn't anticipated that her betrayal would have such a significant impact on them. Without a word, Mike led her to their car. The silence between them was palpable and painful. The only sound was the hum of the engine as he pulled out of the resort's parking lot and onto the winding road home. The drive was filled with silence, and the darkness outside mirrored the tension between them. Mike gripped the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road, and refused to meet Lisa's gaze. They finally reached their house. Mike cut the engine and got out without saying anything, walking to the front door. Lisa followed him inside, but the silence lingered, hanging over them like a storm about to break. As they entered the dimly lit hallway, Mike stopped and took a slow, deliberate breath. He gathered the courage to say what had been building inside him since the night began, but before he could speak, Lisa's voice broke the silence. Her tone was sharp and accusatory. "Do you have any idea what you did back there?" "Mike," she demanded, her eyes flashing with anger. "You started a fire. You put everyone at risk. You could have hurt someone, even killed someone." Mike felt his own anger flare as her words cut into him like salt on a raw wound. He turned to face her, his jaw tight, his voice cold. "I put everyone at risk," he replied bitterly. "Are you serious? Do you even realize what you were about to do tonight? You were ready to throw away everything we've built, everything we are, for one night with that man for money. Did you ever think about that, Lisa? Were you too busy thinking about money?" Lisa looked away, a hint of guilt flashing across her face, but she quickly recovered. "Mike, you don't understand. This wasn't just about the money. It was about a better life for all of us, a future for our kids. David's influence could have opened doors for us." "Mike, you think that would have secured our future, selling yourself and us to that man? That's what you think a good future looks like?" "Don't be so dramatic, Mike," she said, her voice edged with frustration. "It was a choice. One night wouldn't have changed how I feel about you or our family." "Don't lie to yourself, Lisa," Mike replied. His voice was hollow. "It changes everything. You didn't just make a choice tonight. You destroyed our trust, the moment you considered that offer. The moment you put his money over our family. You crossed a line that we can't uncross." Lisa's expression faltered. Her anger, something more fragile, came over her as she looked down, her hands twisting nervously. "I just wanted to give us more, to not feel trapped, to have choices, options, you know," Mike said, his voice breaking with the weight of betrayal. "What we had wasn't good enough for you. Everything we built, all the nights I thought we were on the same page. You were just waiting for someone to come along and offer you a better option." Lisa's face twisted with guilt, and for a moment she seemed to search for something to say. She looked at him, searching for something to say, but couldn't find anything. "I didn't mean for it to come to this," she whispered. "I didn't realize it would hurt you like this," she added. Mike took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, but the weight of her words only deepened his resolve. He felt like he was standing on a ledge, looking out over the life they'd built and realizing for the first time that it was already gone. Trust was the foundation of everything they'd shared, and tonight that foundation had shattered. "I don't think I can come back from this, Lisa." In a quiet voice, his tone betrayed resignation. He thought he knew her, that they were stronger than this, but tonight he realized he was wrong. She had shown him exactly where he stood in her life, and it wasn't where he thought it was. Lisa's face crumpled, her hand reaching out as if to touch him, to pull him back. "Mike, please, this isn't what I wanted. I made a mistake, a huge mistake. Can't we fix this? Start over?" But Mike took a step back, avoiding her touch. His gaze hardened. "How do you rebuild a marriage when there's no trust left?" he asked. "I don't even know who you are anymore." Her face fell. Her eyes were wide and glassy, a mixture of regret and fear. "Mike, don't say that. I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you, but don't throw everything away because of this one night." "One night," Mike said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's all it took for you to throw me away. That's what hurts the most, Lisa. You made your choice, and now I have to make mine." There was a silence between them, heavy and irreversible. Lisa opened her mouth as if to say something, but the words seemed to catch in her throat. Her expression twisted with helplessness for the first time. She finally understood the full depth of what she'd done and the damage she'd caused. There was no way she could make up for it with an apology. "I can't live like this," Mike said. "I can't look at you and not see you tonight, and I can't stop feeling this betrayal. I thought we'd have each other for a lifetime. But tonight, you showed me that I'm just another option to you." Tears welled up in Lisa's eyes, her lips parting as if to argue, but she found herself at a loss. She wanted to plead and promise that she could change, and that she would somehow undo what had been done, but the words wouldn't come. She knew. Lisa knew deep down that she couldn't erase what had happened. As Mike walked towards the stairs, Lisa took a shaky breath. She reached out and called his name, but he didn't turn back. His footsteps echoed down the hall. As he walked away, Lisa felt the distance between them grow. She was alone with her regret, realizing that her actions had cost her the man she loved, the life they had shared, and the trust that could never be restored. They got divorced quickly and easily, which was a stark contrast to the emotions that led to it. They divided their assets in the same practical way they had once planned vacations and family projects. Mike got the house, and Lisa moved into a nearby apartment to stay close to the kids. They split custody so that Sarah and Jacob would still feel supported and loved, even though their parents' lives were now separated. The hotel fire never came back to haunt Mike. The flames had been contained before causing any serious damage. Nobody could find out where it came from. It was as if the fire had burned up everything he needed to release, leaving him with a strange, cautious peace in its place. Mike focused on his work, and more importantly, on his children. He took up a new position at a smaller, family-oriented engineering firm. He found a new job at a smaller, family-oriented engineering firm close to home. The pay was a little less, but he didn't mind. It gave him more time to be there for Sarah and Jacob. He could pick them up from school, help with homework, and tuck them in at night. He poured his energy into creating a sense of stability for them. He was determined to make sure they never doubted how much he loved them. They never doubted how much he loved them. Lisa, meanwhile, moved forward in her own way. She understood with painful clarity the cost of her choices. She still loved her children, and she did her best to be present for them during her time with them. The warmth that had once defined her family life felt distant now. She knew she couldn't undo what she'd done, and so she accepted the consequences. She carried the weight of regret that only deepened each time she saw Mike's determined, steady strength. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to the channel. I wish you a great mood and good luck.